faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally with Talking Books. Today, I'm introducing the book called History of the Northern Warlords. Before diving into the book, let's rewind to Tianjin over 100 years ago to witness a special inauguration ceremony. On December 16th, 1895, a short but energetic man arrived at Tianjin Shalzan to start his new role. This man was Yuan Shikai, and his new job was to oversee the training of the new army under imperial decree. Back then, people probably couldn't imagine that amidst the attention and at ease drills, this army would soon change China's history. Yuan Shikai spent over a decade building China's most elite modern army at the time. The Northern New Army. Northern is a geographical term, roughly divided at the Yangtze River's Wusunkou, with coastal areas north called Northern Yang and south called Southern Yang. Since Yuan Shikai served as viceroy of Zhili and northern minister, and his generals mostly came from the Northern Military Academy, later generations called his forces the Northern Warlords. In chaotic times, this army became Yuan Shikai's biggest political asset, letting him dominate late king politics and rise to prime minister with immense power. After the Xinhai Revolution, Yuan Shikai used this force to become president of the Republic of China, starting the Northern Warlords' rule over the nation. This period of Northern Warlords' rule is generally known as the Beijing government era of the Republic of China. The Beijing government era began in 1912 when Yuan Shikai became president and ended in 1928 when the Northern Expedition Army captured Beijing, lasting 16 years. This era had two key traits. First, military dictatorship, where almost everyone from the president and premier down to provincial governors were military men. Second, the politics were super chaotic. 16 years saw 2 attempts to restore the monarchy, 3 parliament dissolutions, constant delays in making a constitution, and endless upheavals, with a whopping 46 cabinets and 32 premiers. Just a messy rotation where one exits and another enters. So, some liken this era to the tumultuous Five Dynasties period between Tang and Song, comparing the Republic to that troubled time. Renowned historian Lai Shinsha pored over tons of sources for half a century to finally untangle this tangled history, finishing this million-word history of the Northern Warlords. Now, a must-read intro on the topic. Next, I'll explore 3 angles: the crisis of legitimacy, factional fights, and the turnover of figures within the Northern Warlords to see how they ruled China and gradually crumbled. Among them, the crisis of legal legitimacy caused the Northern Warlords to lose government credibility, and factional struggles weakened their control over the nation. The turnover of Northern figures was the final process leading to the demise of the Northern Warlords. First, let's talk about the crisis of legal legitimacy. Legal legitimacy refers to the legitimacy of a regime. After the establishment of the Republic of China, the legitimacy of the regime came from the national constitution. At that time, due to haste, only a provisional constitution was enacted, but its effect was equivalent to a constitution. The organizational form of the government, the duties and powers of the president and premier, were all stipulated by the provisional constitution. The crisis of legal legitimacy refers to the Northern Warlords, after coming to power, seeking greater authority and unwilling to be constrained by the provisional constitution, thus triggering various political upheavals. Ultimately, the Beijing government lost all authority and was no longer recognized by the people. During the Northern Warlords period, there were 3 crises of legal legitimacy in total. The first crisis of legal legitimacy occurred from 1913 to 1914 when Yuan Shikai was president. The controversy was over where the real power of the state should lie, with the president or the cabinet. At the beginning, when Sun Yat-sen served as interim president, he emulated the U.S., implementing a presidential system where government power was in the president's hands. However, due to the weak strength of the Revolutionary Party, they couldn't rival the Northern Warlords. The northern and southern sides reached a compromise. Yuan Shikai facilitated the abdication of the Qing emperor, and Sun Yat-sen yielded the presidency to Yuan Shikai. To limit Yuan Shikai's power, Sun Yat-sen, before stepping down, spent only a month hastily drafting and enacting the provisional constitution, transferring the president's powers to a cabinet formed from the parliament, thus changing from a presidential to a cabinet system. But the cabinet issued orders. The head of the cabinet, called the premier, held the actual executive power. With this change, President Yuan Shikai became a head of state with no real power. As a formidable figure of his time, how could Yuan Shikai be content? He was bound to find ways to break the constraints of the constitution. Thus, the first crisis of legal legitimacy emerged. After becoming president, the first cabinet premier was Tong Shoye. Tong was Yuan Shikai's old friend and subordinate, having worked together for over 20 years. Publicly and privately, they should have collaborated very harmoniously. However, Yuan Shikai's appointments of officials were vetoed by Tang Shaohui several times, so he instructed soldiers to openly interfere in politics, having them issue telegrams to threaten the cabinet. In less than 3 months, Tang Shaohui couldn't carry on, resigned, and left. Old friends for over 20 years ultimately parted ways. Yuan Shikai not only had to deal with the cabinet, but also the even more troublesome parliament. In the parliament, Kuomintang members held an absolute majority, opposing Yuan Shikai at every turn. They questioned the president daily, frequently issued impeachment motions, giving him no peace. He could either continue endless disputes with the parliament or seize absolute power like before. Yuan Shikai decided to take a gamble. He masterminded the assassination of Sun Jiaren and used military force to suppress the Second Revolution, launched by Sun Yat-sen and Huang Xing. On November 4th, 1913, Yuan Shikai ordered the dissolution of the Kuomintang, revoked the qualifications of its parliamentary members, and confiscated their credentials. With insufficient members for a quorum, the parliament was forced to adjourn, effectively dissolved. Subsequently, Yuan Shikai reissued the Constitution of the Republic of China, granting the president unlimited power. From then on, Yuan Shikai, wielding all power, thought he had won, but he only went further down the path of centralization. In 1916, he ultimately brought ruin upon himself by attempting to restore the imperial monarchy. In practicing republican governance, Yuan Shikai set a bad precedent. When political disputes arose from constraints on his power, instead of seeking legal solutions, he used force to eliminate obstacles, leading later warlords to imitate him and sparking new crises of legal legitimacy. The second crisis of legal legitimacy occurred in 1917 between President Li Yuanhong and Premier Duan Qirui. The core argument remained: who has the final say, the president or the premier? This president, Li Yuanhong, wasn't part of the northern faction. He was thrust into the role of military governor during the Wuchang uprising by soldiers, accidentally gaining immense prestige. After the Republic of China was founded, he was coerced to Beijing, stripped of military power, posing little threat to any faction. So during Yuan Shikai's era, he served as a powerless vice president. After Yuan Shikai's death, Li Yuanhong restored the republic. According to legal succession, he became president, reinstating the provisional constitution and the previously paralyzed parliament. At this time, the premier, Duan Qirui, was Yuan Shikai's trusted northern ally. controlling the military. In Duan Qirui's eyes, Li Yuanhong was just a figurehead. First, according to the Provisional Constitution, actual power lay with the premier. As long as Li Yuanhong obeyed him in everything and acted as a rubber stamp president, there'd be no issue. But Li Yuanhong didn't think so. He believed his presidency was legitimate and rightful, and he saw no need to submit to Duan Qirui. Under the Provisional Constitution, the president has veto power over cabinet appointments. So Li Yuanhong firmly rejected any nominations Duan Qirui submitted that he didn't like, even refusing to stamp them when Duan came in person. Over time, the rift between Duan Qirui and Li Yuanhong deepened, eventually turning into opposing each other regardless of principles. If the presidential office approved, the premier would oppose. If the premier opposed, the presidential office would approve. As mentioned earlier, since the Provisional Constitution was drafted hastily in just a month, without detailed discussion, it had many loopholes. For example, on one hand, it emphasized cabinet responsibility, but on the other hand, it stipulated that the president oversaw all government affairs. This led to unclear authority between the presidential office and the cabinet, with mutual accusations and buck passing. It can be seen that the conflict was both a power struggle and a negative consequence of the Provisional Constitution's vagueness. Duan Qirui, being a military man, was fed up with political disputes and surprisingly imitated Yuan Shikai by summoning provincial governors to Beijing under the guise of a meeting, actually to threaten with force. In 1917, over whether China should join World War I, the two sides were deadlocked. Duan Qirui threatened to resign, and urged by advisors, Li Yuanhong dismissed Duan, escalating things further. Provincial governors seized the chance to declare independence, demanding constitutional changes and parliament dissolution, pushing the country toward collapse. Li Yuanhong panicked, as the Provisional Constitution didn't give the president power to dissolve parliament. Li Yuanhong had to illegally dissolve parliament and urgently called Zhang Zuolin, a governor leader, to Beijing to mediate. Amid the conflict, Zhang Zuolin had other plans. He entered Beijing, drove out Li Yuanhong, restored the imperial monarchy, and brought back the abdicated Qing Emperor Puyi. Zhang Zuolin's restoration gave Duan Qirui a chance to make a comeback. He immediately organized an army in Tianjin Machang to defeat Zhang Zuolin. Duan Qirui became a hero for restoring the republic and resumed as premier. Having suffered enough from the conflicts, Duan Qirui refused to be constrained by the Provisional Constitution and Parliament anymore. Upon taking office, the first thing he did was refuse to restore the Provisional Constitution and the dissolved Parliament. He started anew, organizing loyalists, re-electing parliamentary members, and forming a parliament completely under his control. Since members often gathered at the Anhui Club in Beijing, the new parliament was called the Anhui Parliament. By 1920, Duan Qirui was defeated in the warlord conflicts and stepped down, leaving his personally branded Anhui Parliament deemed illegal and first to be dissolved. It can be said that the presidential premier conflict led to the abolition of the Provisional Constitution, turning parliament into a warlord-controlled institution. Duan Qirui's actions imitated Yuan Shikai's use of military interference. He never legally resolved the power division between president and premier, resorting to manipulation instead, further weakening the northern regime's legitimacy. The third crisis of legal legitimacy occurred in 1923 when Cao Kun became president through bribery. The severity of this crisis was that the illegally elected president tainted the reputation of the constitution he enacted. In 1920, Cao Kun defeated Duan Qirui. In 1922, he defeated Zhang Zuolin and gained sole control of the Beijing government. At 60, he was eager to become president, but the president had to be elected by parliament. So Cao Kun declared respect for the provisional constitution, recalled Li Yuanhong from retirement to resume presidency, and restored the parliament dissolved during the second crisis. Public opinion called it the revival of legal legitimacy, but Li Yuanhong's return was far from glorious. It was merely Cao Kun's stepping stone, serving less than a year before fleeing to Tianjin. Before leaving, Li hid the presidential seal, only for Cao Kun's men to intercept his train. Facing military threats, he surrendered the seal's location in exchange for safe passage. Cao Kun then bribed parliament members at 5,000 silver dollars each, spending millions. He became president through bribery, the last president of the northern government. To legitimize his rule, he enacted the Constitution of the Republic of China in 1923. The Republic's first formal constitution, issued 12 years after the Republic's founding, with a president elected and parliament functioning, it seemed to resolve the legitimacy crisis but created greater problems. Since Cao Kun bought the presidency, even the constitution was mocked as the bribery constitution. Both the regime and constitution faced unprecedented legitimacy doubts, so Cao Kun's presidency lasted only a year. In October 1924, Feng Guozhang from Cao's own faction launched the Beijing coup, imprisoning Cao Kun. Duan Qirui returned to power at Feng Guozhang's invitation. His ambitions were still strong. He'd always hated parliamentary politics, and this time he went all out, directly abolishing parliament and the constitution under bribery charges. From then on, the Beijing government had no head of state elected by popular institutions, no parliament, and no constitution. It became a 3-no government. After taking office, Duan Qirui called himself the provisional ruler of the Republic of China, a temporary transition, which was kind of awkward. Here we've covered the 3 crises of legal legitimacy during the Northern Warlords' rule. The legitimacy crisis was never solved, and eventually even the constitutional rules vanished. Politics became pure manipulation. The reason was that the Northern leaders had huge ambition and selfishness, which was a big factor in their final failure. That's all for the crisis of legal legitimacy. Now, let's talk about the factional struggles of the Northern Warlords. If the legitimacy crisis was more about political fights, factional struggles were full-on armed conflicts. First, let's look at the basics of the Northern factions. The Northern Warlords group, led by Yuan Shikai, was his personal army. Yuan Shikai was great at winning over subordinates with status, money, and personal affection. Once, when Zhang Zuolin came for a talk, he glanced a few times at some porcelain on the table. Yuan Shikai noticed and remembered. That same night, those exquisite porcelains were sent to Zhang's residence. So, during Yuan Shikai's reign, his subordinates were happy to serve him. The northern group kept overall unity. After Yuan Shikai died, the northern group lost its patriarch and various leaders rose up, mainly 3 powerful military factions: Anhui clique, Zhili clique, and Fengtian clique. The Anhui clique's Anhui is short for Anhui province. Its leader was Duan Qirui, who was from Anhui. He was from Hefei, and their influence was mainly in Anhui, Zhejiang, Shandong, Fujian, and other provinces. Zhili clique. The Zhili clique's Zhili is short for Zhili, equivalent to today's Hebei. Its leader was Feng Guozhang, who was from Zhili. He was from Hejian, and their sphere included Hebei, Hubei, Jiangxi, Jiangsu, and other provinces. Duan Qirui and Feng Guozhang were Yuan Shikai's most trusted generals. They were core northern figures. The Fengtian clique leader was Zhang Zuolin from Haicheng, Fengtian, equivalent to today's Liaoning. The Fengtian clique rose outside the pass. It wasn't part of the core northern group, but had rich resources in the 3 northeastern provinces and strong military power, forming a balance with Zhili and Anhui cliques. Actually, at the beginning, there were warlords big and small all over China. Local warlords needed to find a patron in the central government to stabilize their rule. So they actively picked sides. If they were closer to Duan Qirui, they called themselves the Anhui clique. If familiar with Feng Guozhang, they claimed Zhili clique. Um, the Anhui, Zhili, and Fengtian cliques eyed each other greedily, all wanting to knock out the others and control the central government, sparking factional chaos. So what are the key features of these factional fights? This roughly includes two aspects. First, each faction copied Yuan Shikai's patriarchal style, using personal favors to win over followers, creating concentric circles of closeness. In these circles, those closer to the center are the reliable core. Outer relationships are looser, often with defections and betrayals, like Zhang Zuolin pushing his own son as a prime example. For Zhang Shuilian, besides the father-son bond, it was also about teacher-student ties. Senior Northern Warlord generals mostly came from two schools, Biang Military Academy and Bading Military Academy. Teacher-student bonds became crucial for loyalty to superiors. Second, factions might seem like mortal enemies, but in battles, they usually avoided finishing each other off. So the losing side often announced their resignation nationwide via telegram. After a nationwide resignation announcement, they were free to leave without imprisonment or death. This was partly because factions had tangled personal ties and partly from fear of payback, hoping to keep future collab options open. By incomplete counts, during the Northern Warlords' 16-year rule, nearly 600 fights broke out nationwide, averaging one every 10 days. Here, I'll just cover three decisive wars that clearly show the two factional traits. The first was the 1920 Zhili-Anhui War, kicking off armed grabs for central power involving Anhui and Zhili clique leaders. Duan Qirui and Feng Guozhang applied to Tianjin Biyang Military Academy at the same time and got in together. These old bunkmates became sworn brothers in school with super tight bonds. After graduation, Duan Qirui headed to Germany for more study, while Feng Guozhang stayed as an instructor. In their later military years, both rose as Yuan Shikai's most trusted generals, thanks to their skills. They became Yuan Shikai's most trusted right-hand men. In 1917, after Zhang Shun's restoration failed, Feng Guozhang became president, while Duan Qirui remained premier. At the time, public opinion believed these two old friends, working together, should cooperate harmoniously through difficulties. Yet no one expected these brother-like friends would stage the second presidential premier conflict. China then faced a north-south political standoff, with many southern warlords refusing northern control. They exploited the legitimacy crisis and Sun Yat-sen's influence to create division. On unifying the nation, Duan and Feng held different views. Feng advocated peaceful unification. Duan pushed military force. Duan sent generals south to fight, but Feng delayed orders, unwilling to fight. Cracks formed between them. Personally, Duan loved mahjong and invited Feng to bond, but Feng hated gambling. Feng never accepted. Duan felt disrespected by his president friend, growing bitter. With aides fanning flames and taking sides, Feng and Duan eventually cut off contact. Their conflict caused flip-flopping policies and wavering war or peace stances toward the south, confusing subordinates. Finally, both stepped down. Feng quit as president, Duan as premier. Feng Guozhang soon died of illness. His protégés Cao Kun and Wu Pifu became the new Zhili clique leaders. When Feng and Duan were in power, old brotherhood prevented total factional rupture. But newcomers Cao Kun and Wu Pifu tore off pretenses, constantly challenging Duan's Anhui clique. Initially, their controlled central government just played political games. By July 1920, they finally clashed in the Zhili-Anhui War. Interestingly, the war's end was quite dramatic. Wu Pifu led light cavalry on a flanking maneuver through mountain paths in heavy rain, raiding the Anhui headquarters at Songlindian, Zhuzhou. As Kui Tongfeng, Anhui's commander, stared at the rain, Wu entered, bowed slightly, and said softly, "Commander, it's time to go." Capturing Kui just like that, the Anhui clique's army collapsed completely. In less than 2 weeks of fighting, Duan Qirui was forced to resign and retreat to Tianjin. The second major war was the 1924 Second Zhili-Fengtian War. Unprecedented in scale, the Fengtian clique replaced the core northern faction in controlling the Beijing government. After Zhili dominated central power, Cao Kun governed Beijing while Wu Pifu trained troops in Luoyang, alarming other warlords, especially the Fengtian faction in Manchuria. Though Fengtian leader Zhang Zuolin started as a bandit, he amassed massive power with Japanese backing, long harboring ambitions to push southward and seize central control. However, since Fengtian wasn't part of the core northern group, Zhang could only salt the sand, planting cronies in Beijing's cabinet to gradually influence central authority. Facing Fengtian's aggression, Zhili refused to yield. Escalating tensions sparked 2 consecutive Zhili-Fengtian wars. The first Zhili-Fengtian war ended in Fengtian's defeat. 2 years later, in September 1924, the Second Zhili-Fengtian War erupted. This was the largest battle among Northern Warlords since the Republic's founding. Over 100,000 troops were deployed. Zhili leader Wu Peifu, confident of victory, boasted he'd end the war within 3 weeks. While fierce fighting raged at Shanhaiguan, a Zhili general secretly returned to Beijing and launched a sudden coup. This general was Feng Guozhang. Both he and Wu Peifu were rising Zhili stars who'd fought tirelessly for the faction. This bred Wu's jealousy. Feng was transferred to Beijing as powerless army inspector, a move that deeply angered him. On October 22, 1924, stationed at Gubei-ku, Feng suddenly turned traitor. His Beijing coup imprisoned Cao Kun, renamed his troops the National Army, and uprooted Zhili's rear base, causing total collapse. Wu Peifu fled south by sea from Tianjin with remnants of his army, ending Zhili's control over Beijing. The third crucial battle was Guo Sonling's rebellion against the Fengtian clique, marking the decline of the entire northern system. After the Second Zhili-Fengtian War, though Fengtian controlled Beijing, Zhang Zuolin lacked the political prestige of Zhili or Anhui warlords. They entrenched themselves long-term in the Beijing government. To other forces within the pass, he was an absolute newcomer. Zhang Zuolin prioritized military expansion, pushing nationwide to the Yangtze region, disrupting warlord power structures, and sparking anti-Fengtian sentiment across China. The existing military situation triggered nationwide anti-Fengtian waves. At this critical moment, undercurrents surged within the Fengtian clique. The Fengtian general Guo Sonling prepared to rebel. As their top commander, Guo was fiercely brave with many victories, especially close to young Marshal Zhang Zuolin. In the Second Zhili-Fengtian War, Guo achieved most victories but faced exclusion from Zhang Zuolin's inner circle. He consistently opposed Fengtian's southward push, urging Zhang Zuolin to modernize northeast China and let people rest. Deeply dissatisfied with Zhang Zuolin, Feng Guozhang exploited this, secretly allying with Guo against him. Urged by Feng Guozhang, in November 1925, Guo suddenly rebelled, leading elite troops back to attack Shenyang. Zhang Zuolin's rule hung by a thread. He even prepared to step down. Later, with covert Japanese help, Guo was defeated and killed, saving Zhang Zuolin. After this turmoil, the weakened Fengtian clique declined, leaving no dominant force in the northern system. That concludes Northern Warlord factions and conflicts, the Zhili-Anhui War, 2 Zhili-Fengtian Wars, and Guo's rebellion were their largest clashes. Though each side accused others of warmongering, pre-war, all lacked principles. Their real goal was defeating rivals to seize central power. Moreover, warlord factions weren't monolithic. New faces emerged, leading to Part Three's focus. The Northern Warlords' renewal, their continuous fracturing until final demise. After major conflicts, internal splits, constantly refreshed warlords, big and small. Old warlords born in the 1850s to 60s, Yuan Shikai, Duan Qirui, Feng Guozhang, faded from politics. New warlords born in the 1870s to the 80s, Wu Peifu, Sun Chuanfan, took the political stage. There are two trends here. Personnel turnover, meaning new political leaders emerged within the Northern Warlords, with Wu Peifu and Sun Chuanfang being the most prominent. And the other trend is a shift in the ideological stances of Northern figures. Representative figures of this shift are Fan Yusheng and Guo Songlin. First, let's look at the representative figures of personnel turnover. Wu Peifu was the most capable and popular military commander among the Northern Warlords after Yuan Shikai. Born in 1874 in Penglai, Shandong, he was well versed in the 4 books and 5 classics from childhood. Though he earned the Shu Chai degree, Wu Peifu admired anti-Japanese hero Qi Jiguan and aspired to excel in both civil and military affairs, aiming to become a high-ranking official or general. So he later enrolled in the Army Accelerated Military Academy and graduated as the top student. These experiences made Wu Peifu not only a fierce fighter, but also a shrewd politician who knew how to win people's hearts. In 1917, when Duan Qirui rejected the Provisional Constitution, Sun Yat-sen launched the Constitution Protection Movement in the South. In 1918, as acting commander of the 3rd Division, Wu Peifu led his troops south into Hunan and engaged in fierce battles with the Southern Constitution Protection Government's forces. After 6 days of bloody combat, Wu captured the strategic city of Waiyuzhou. Then he swept southward, conquering Changsha, Zhuzhou, Shangkan, and Hengyang in rapid succession. Further south would have taken him into Guangdong, the Constitution Protection Government's stronghold. What happened next shows Wu Peifu was no ordinary man. Observing the political climate and sensing public war weariness, he took the lead in proposing peace talks, declaring he would no longer fight civil wars, a move that won nationwide acclaim. When the May 4th movement erupted in 1919, Wu became the first military leader to publicly support the students, and he issued a nationwide telegram condemning the Northern government's suppression of the student movement and demanding the students' immediate release. These actions earned him immense prestige, making him a political star watched by China and the world. After the 1924 defeat in the Second Zhili Fengtian War, Wu Peifu laid low for a while. By 1925, amid nationwide anti-Fengtian sentiment, he maneuvered his comeback, becoming the Zhili leader and controlling Henan and Hubei provinces. Having covered Wu Peifu, let's turn to another rising northern figure, Sun Chuanfang. Though from the Zhili clique, Sun Chuanfang wasn't part of Cao Kun and Wu Peifu's inner circle. Born in 1885 in Tai'an, Shandong, Sun graduated from the Japanese Army Officer School in 1908. He possessed notable military talent and political acumen. Sun Chuanfang usually enjoyed reading historical classics, with records of the Grand Historian and Zhili, Tengjian always on his desk. He was constantly seen with books, styling himself as a scholar general. In 1922, after the Zhili clique seized Beijing's government, Sun Chuanfang was the first to telegraph advocating restoration of legal legitimacy to end the North-South division. This made him widely known and earned him considerable reputation. Later, Sun Chuanfang campaigned through Fujian and Zhejiang, continuously expanding his forces. In 1925, when the Fengtian clique moved south to the Yangtze region, with terrible discipline that alienated locals. Sun Chuanfang seized the chance. Under training pretense, he organized 30,000 elite troops for a five-pronged surprise attack on Fengtian forces. He drove them from the Yangtze region and swiftly captured five provinces: Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Anhui, Fujian, and Jiangxi. Afterwards, Sun Chuanfeng appointed himself commander-in-chief of the Five-Province Alliance, controlling China's wealthiest Yangtze region. Though nominally subordinate to Wu Peifu, he operated independently as the new Zhili clique, ruling the southeast as the Southeast King. Wu and Sun together controlled the middle lower Yangtze region. They represented the ascendant forces within the Northern Warlords. Without the later Northern expedition, the Northern system would have kept producing such figures. This created an unbreakable cycle where chaos never ceased. Having covered personnel changes among Northern Warlords, let's examine ideological shifts within them. This involves two figures, Feng Yushang and Guo Songling. Feng Yushang was born in 1882 in Kangzhou, Hebei. From a poor family, he joined the army at 14. During the 1911 revolution, he participated in the Tongmenhui uprising in Luanzhou, Hebei. Though minimally literate, he loved reading. Using spare moments in barracks, he self-studied diligently, rising militarily to become a famed Zhili clique general. Among northern officers, Feng uniquely emphasized ideological indoctrination, rare among warlords prioritizing personal gain. For this, he used two books, Zhang Guofan and Hu Linye's military treatise from Hunan army leaders, and the Bible. Feng, a Christian, blended Chinese ethics with Christian doctrine, promoting benevolence, charity, sacrifice, and service, earning him the Christian General nickname. In 1921, Feng Yushang led troops into Shanxi, becoming its military governor. In 1923, Feng Yushang began contacting Soviet representatives. A year later, during the Second Zhili-Fengtian War, Feng launched the Beijing coup, seizing central power. This coup was monumental. It shattered the Northern Warlords' rotational control of central government since Yuan Shikai. Moreover, Feng renamed his troops the National Army, signaling political ideals beyond mere interests to redefine warlord identity. In 1925, Feng became Northwest Frontier Commissioner. He hired Soviet advisors and received weapons support from Russia. During the Northern Expedition, he allied with the Southern nationalist government, shattering old Northern orthodoxies and accelerating the warlords' collapse. Having covered Feng, who broke from Zhili, let's examine Guo Songling, who rebelled against Fengtian. Guo Songling was unique. He wasn't originally within the Northern system. Born in 1883 in Shenyang, Liaoning, he joined the Tongmenhui during the 1911 revolution and launched uprisings in Liaoning. In 1917, when Duan Qirui defeated restorationist Zhang Shun but refused to restore the provisional constitution, Sun Yat-sen launched the Constitution Protection Movement in the South. Guo joined to fight Northern Warlords. In 1919, when Zhang Zuolin re-established the Northeast Military Academy, Guo returned as an instructor. There he met Zhang Shuiliang, who deeply admired his competence and vision. Recommended by young Marshal Zhang, Guo gained Zhang Zuolin's trust, rising to Chief of Staff of Zhang Shuiliang's Guard Brigade, then acting Chief of Staff for Northeast Army Reorganization. After Fengtian took Beijing in 1924 and expanded nationwide, anti-Fengtian sentiment surged. Learning Japan backed Zhang Zuolin's moves, Guo felt profound disgust and disappointment. Coincidentally, Guo's wife and Feng Yushang's wife were classmates at Yenching University. Through this link, Guo and Feng conspired to bring peace to North China with Soviet backing. On November 22, 1925, Guo Songling openly rebelled against Zhang Zuolin. 1 month later, he was defeated. Fearing someone might save Guo Songling, Zhang Zuolin ordered frontline commanders to execute Guo and his wife on the spot. Guo's case shows that in the late Northern Warlords era, new political factors emerged, bringing unprecedented ideological renewal within the faction. As the Northern leadership renewed itself, history accelerated faster. The decisive force to bury the Northern Warlords began rising in southern China. This was the nationalist government, founded by Sun Yat-sen in Guangzhou. From 1913 to 1923, Sun used his influence to steer Beijing's government back on track, but failed. In 1923, after Cao Kun's bribed election, Sun's Kuomintang abandoned the old legal system and parliament, establishing a new nationalist government in Guangzhou. With Soviet help, the Guangzhou government founded the Whampoa Military Academy, attracting educated youth to train an army with new ideologies. This army became the National Revolutionary Army. On July 9th, 1926, the Guangzhou government launched the Northern Expedition, using a strategy of allying with distant enemies while attacking nearby ones. First attack Wu Peifu neutralized Sun Chuanfeng, finally strike Zhang Zuolin. Xing Yixchang's National Army pledged support at Weiyuan, Jiangxi, coordinating north-south operations. In just over a year, the Northern Expedition crushed Wu Peifu and Sun Chuanfeng. Only the Fengtian clique remained, trapped in Beijing. With parliament dissolved, they formed the Anglo-Jun government, with Zhang as generalissimo, the last northern leader. By June 1928, Northern Expedition forces entered Beijing, forcing Zhang to retreat beyond the Great Wall. Zhang's refusal of Japanese demands to occupy Manchuria enraged the Kwantung Army, with rumors of threats against him. Though Zhang laid false trails and changed departure dates, he couldn't escape Japanese assassins. At 5:30 a.m. on June 4, 1928, as Zhang's blue armored train passed Huangutun Station, Japanese agents detonated explosives. With a massive blast, Zhang Zuolin was killed. Half a year later, Zhang Zuolin announced changing the flag, with northeast China submitting to the Nanjing national government, thus spanning 33 years from the 1895 Shaojian military training to the 1928 Huangutun incident. The era when the Northern Warlords dominated China's politics finally vanished amid blood and fire. All right, that concludes our interpretation of the history of the Northern Warlords. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.